Hope you all had a very interesting session on media and journalism, and we are all set to begin our second track for the day on NGO sector. Our moderator for this session, Mr. Ratish Balakrishnan, Managing Partner at Sattva Consulting. Ratish Balakrishnan is a co-founder and managing partner at Sattva Consulting. As a part of his role, he has extensive experience in conceptualizing and implementing large-scale solutions that bring together leading foundations, corporations, civil society organizations, and the government. He has extensive hands-on experience across a wide range of sectors, including education, healthcare, skill development, livelihoods, women empowerment, forced labor, and child rights. Over the last 10 years, Ratish has worked closely with leading non-profit leaders in enabling organizations in enabling orbit-shifting change. Together with the non-profit leaders, Ratish has contributed at both state and national level policy discussion across education and skill development. He is a published author and a TEDx speaker. Prior to Sattva, Ratish worked across multinational and international organizations across research, engineering, product management, and corporate strategy division. We welcome you to the session, sir, and it is a pleasure to have you. Our remaining panelists for the session are Ram Kolavenu, Chief Operating Officer at Business Head at LabourNet Service India Private Limited, Raj Gopal CV, Program Manager Admissions at Azim Premji University, Akshay Sarin, Founder and MD at blessedby.com, and Akhil Suresh Nair, International Relations Student at UNSW Sydney. Ratish sir, over to you.
Thank you so much, Nikita, and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this discussion. We have a fairly esteemed panel here, and it's my pleasure to give a quick introduction about all of them before we jump into the content of the questions. So Ram is, as Nikita rightly said, the CEO of Business Head at LabourNet. India is one of the largest social enterprises in India. He's been a part of the core team and was instrumental in scaling up LabourNet in the space of livelihood, reaching out to 1 million in the unorganized sector so far. Before LabourNet, Ram was in the global leadership role for about 15 years in organizations like Tesco, Unilever, Satyam, and Godrej. And it's a consistent pattern that we will see today as part of our discussions, that the profiles and the backgrounds of people that are part of this conversation is extremely varied, and they bring in a very, very interesting and diverse experience. Following Ram is Mr. C.V. Rajgopal. He's trained as an electrical engineer from REC Surathkal. He has about 22 years of experience in various sectors. He started his career as a planning engineer and worked in various electromechanical projects in India for about 4.5 years. Joined the IT sector and worked in organizations like Tata Infotech, Tata Consultancy, and Accenture for about 12 years, and worked in the US and the UK before returning to India in 2013. He's currently with the Azim Premji Foundation since 2013 and heads the admissions at the Azim Premji University. So really is at a point where he's able to see young people joining the sector and has a fairly strong vantage point in terms of both the industry and the inputs that come into the social sector as well. Akshay Sarin is the founder of Blessed By, and is on a mission to transform consumers into contributors and create a community of 1 billion conscious consumers and transform them into active participants in the development sector. He's his professional experience spans about 21 years across shaping culture, creating community movements, ecosystems, global marketing, creative leadership, and impact entrepreneurship. He's lived in Amsterdam, India, United States, London, Egypt, Oman, and Philippines, and has traveled across 40 plus countries and 200 plus cities around the world. And again, so another theme that's going to resonate today is just an international outlook towards impact, and I hope you're able to provide that as well as part of your conversations. Lastly is Akhil Suresh Nair is a postgraduate student in the discipline of international relations at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia. He's presently specializing in development studies, decolonization in the Asia and Pacific, gender and global politics, international peace and security, international political economy, and the history of foreign affairs. Over the last 5 years, he's, in addition to his academic pursuit, also volunteered and interned in nonprofit organizations and corporate organizations. So I wasn't overstating it when I said it is an esteemed panel. People from across industry, international experience, entrepreneurs, and students, giving us a more rounded view of where we are with respect to in the social sector today. A couple of key principles for our discussion today, as we start our conversation. Number one, this entire discussion is in the service of young people today. It's not to talk about life in general or the social sector in general. It's really to make sure that the people who are on the other side of this conference and the webinar find value in it, and it helps them make better and informed choices about the social sector. I think that's one thing that's very, very clear. And the second is want to make sure that the questions that we answer and the discussions that we have are anchored from the viewpoint that you might bring into these challenges, and so on, and give you a sense of what does it truly take to succeed, either as an entrepreneur or as an intrapreneur within an organization in the social sector. Also want to make sure that when we end this session, at least two things that you take back from the session are: A, you get a more broader and a more rounded view of the social sector beyond maybe what you came in with. And two is you have a sense of what does it take to succeed in a career in the social sector. Yeah. So that's really what we want to cover and leave you with at the end of the session today. The way we will structure it is I'll take about 2 minutes to sort of set the context, and then I will have some questions for my panelists, and we will reserve the last 15 minutes, if not more, for discussions, with all of you, where we can take up some of your questions as well. So personally, I have a similar background as a lot of the other speakers. I was in the mainstream industry for a while, and then gradually moved into the social sector. And I remember that when I came in, I had a notion of a social sector professional, which is a very classic stereotype. A, they don't get paid at all. They work for free. B, they almost always have a beard, carry a bag. C is they're very frustrated with the government, and they're anti-government. They stage protests, and so on. 4 is they primarily work out in rural India, and none of this ended up being true, and in some sense, that stereotype, while it's slowly moving away, it's still probably part of mainstream imagination. And I always tell people who want to move into the social sector that the social sector is not one thing. You can see it as 3 concentric circles. The first circle is really organizations that are working with the poor people directly. And these are traditionally what we will call non-profit organizations and NGOs. The second are organizations that enable these NGOs to work more effectively, from academic institutions that provide them talent, consulting organizations that provide them advisory, research organizations that provide them evidence and data, and other organizations that even fund the work that nonprofits do. That's the second circle. The third circle is really people who talk to the mainstream population about the social sector, and I will explain that in a bit. The third circle organizations are typically, and I don't know if you've heard of them, people like change.org. They run petitions about social issues, but talk to mainstream people. There are e-commerce companies that are responsible companies, and when we talk about Blessed Buy, we will see that their core engagement is with customers, but their motive is social. Similarly, there are other organizations today that really talk to mainstream media and talk about success stories, but essentially are part of what we would call the social sector. And as young people think about careers in the social sector or understand social sector, it's extremely important to understand all the 3 circles that we have. And interestingly today, someone like a Ram is part of the first circle as an organization that's worked with the poor, but not as a non-profit, but actually as a social enterprise and a for-profit organization. It would be great to hear his thoughts on that. Someone like a Raj Gopal, brings in the second level as his university provides the intellectual talent and the capacity that the nonprofits need. I bring in that experience of having worked with nonprofits and funders in social impact. And somebody like an Akshay brings in the third circle view, which is really how do you engage customers to become what he called rightly the participants in the development sector while doing what they do well and doing what they enjoy doing, And as you are thinking about careers in social sector as well, I'd like you to think about the same framing to say, where do you really want to be? Do you want to be in the first circle working with the poor or running a social enterprise? The second circle where you're using your intellectual skills or your other skills to enable nonprofit organizations and social enterprises, or the third circle, which is really where you're engaging customers, mainstream customers on social impact. With that framing in mind, I want to kind of, Ram, ask you the first question. in terms of your vantage point of the CEO of one of the India's largest social enterprises, how do you see the sector evolving today, and what are some of the big trends and changes that you're seeing? It'll be great to hear from you, and then we can take it from there.
Sure. You can hear me now?
Very well, Ram.
Yeah,
Very well.
all right. So, as you rightly said, I think none of us have a beard, and none of us having any bag carried. So that itself shows, how the entire sector has evolved over the last couple of decades or so. Let me just give you an example. When I was in my management today, 20 plus years back. So there was a workshop which was held for NGOs. I mean, primarily trying to develop the NGOs in the area. It was funded by International Labour Organization, ILO. And the kind of people who were there is exactly how you articulate in terms of the beard. And so the change which has happened from in the last 20 odd years is we moved away from unorganized way of having non-profit organizations to able to slightly organized way today. I mean, actually, the fact that we're even having this session for the careers for the youth itself talks about that, it is no more job for people who are retired or something which you want to do as a part-time, something which has been done by people in a rural area and so on and so forth. So that's the paradigm change which has been brought in has come in from the industry perspective. And what has led to this one? I think India, from an economic standpoint of view itself, actually started growing in late 90s and early 20s and so on and so forth, right? So that itself actually started to bring in sort of a money into the social sector, because previously we were very, very heavily dependent on international funds for doing any of the social. So that's from an economic standpoint. And then there are multiple things which have happened in the last half a decade or a decade or so. The entire initiation of a corporate social CSR initiative which has come in from the government to be able to mandate a particular portion of your profits being spent on CSR related activities. They have all these names which have now started to see. I mean, Rajgopal is also there. The trusts and the foundations have started to become bigger and bigger. The wealth which was created in the late 90s and early 2000s have started to actually get into a mode of how social living. So economically, the dependency of a particular entities and all has vanished. We also started to see impact investors starting to come in, meaning I want to do, so our LabourNet is a classic example of that, is where when we were an NGO, we actually started as an NGO. The scale at which we can operate and the impact which we can create was fairly limited to a particular geography or a particular activity which you're doing. Once the impact investment started to come in, and then the social entrepreneurship started to become norm as well. So that's when you actually started to see a lot of traction coming in. So today, at 10, 15 years, 20 years back, I probably wouldn't have imagined doing what I'm doing currently. But I think that change has come in from an economic standpoint of view. There is wealth which has been created to be able to spend on social sector. There is a professional environment which has been brought in from social sector's point of view. And a lot of this non-profit organizations, NGOs on the ground level are having a lot of guidance coming in, the likes of consulting organizations, these peers which you spoke about, right? So it's now, I won't still call it a very organized sector, but we are actually slowly moving to becoming a little more professional way of handling things. And the impact stories which are coming out. So the professionalism which is brought in is fairly good. So that's how the industry is evolving. And I think you start seeing in little more consolidation of the non-profits which are there, because earlier it was all very piecemeal kind of stuff. Now there's a consolidation happening. There are people, networks which have been created on specific activities. The UNDP which has brought in focus areas also is helping in bringing in a cluster of international funds, local funds, and so on and so forth. So it's evolving. I think we have reached a very good stage at this point of time. I think next 10 to 15 years is going to be a growth phase, so to say, for this sector.
Fantastic, Ram. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think the point you made, which is very important, is in some sense, the sector is also shaped by the capital that comes into the sector and the people that come into the sector. as we moved from international funds to local funds to CSRs to even, industrialists now putting in money because of, like what you said, the earned wealth is kind of coming into the social sector. That brings in a certain level of formalization. And secondly is people coming into the sector of bringing their learning and thinking as well. And I think, as you rightly said, it is an evolution that has happened over the last 10, 15 years. And while the perception in the market might still be outdated, internally that formalization and a lot of rigor, I think, and the set of skills that are required today are very, very different. So thank you for laying that out very clearly in terms of some of the macro trends. Mr. Rajagopal, I want to come to you next. I want to translate this in terms of what does it mean in terms of opportunities in the sector? Like this formalization and this thick, this change that's happening, what does it mean in terms of opportunities that are getting created in the social sector?
Fantastic. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about looking at the placements that we had at Azim Premji University. Right? Let me take that as an example. It can be anywhere. Huh? This is not a campaign for Azim Premji University as such. Before talking about opportunities, I'm going to repeat what you said. What we saw is a kind of consolidation in the way the organizations are structured in the social sector space, right? As there are a lot of NGOs coming for the placements, including Azim Premji Foundation. We go to 54 campuses for placements, right? And there are Pradhan would go to 40, 50. Right? LaborNet also goes for campus placements, so they have come to Azim Premji University. Right? There are large NGOs, foundations going. There are community-based organizations like a Kudumbashree in Kerala who would go to campuses for placements. Right? There are CSR departments of Ekotak or a Piramal who would go. There are think tanks, policy think tanks like a World Resources Institute that's available. Satwa goes for campus placements in the consulting space, right? Then there are social enterprises coming up. So it's good to understand that the social sector organizations also have the circles that you were talking. So I'm just giving out names, actual names of, because I always feel social sector organizations don't do enough for branding themselves, like what a corporate would do, right? You can't read the newspaper without seeing a phone ad or a this thing ad. And then, so I think there's a lot of work for us to brand social sector organizations. I did not know until the age of 40 that there's a career path in the social sector. And corporates do it so nicely, giving it tags like vice president, president, which usually only countries have. So that's number one thing. So good to look at organizations. And the last 2 years, we have government organizations coming for placements, right? The livelihood missions go across campuses for placements. So what I'm saying is there is enough opportunities available in the social sector, but do we have enough trained talent out there, right? That's the question that we have. Now, I'll consolidate what does social sector need? I'll just say that in 3 points. It'll be easy for everybody to remember. And I'll stop after this. And the opportunities, this is based on the placement that has happened at what I see. Number one is social sector requires many program managers or program leaders to really design an intervention, implement an intervention, evaluate a program, right? Give feedback to the design. That itself is a large area, and that requires some kind of skills and capabilities, which we'll talk later. So that's number one job, which is called program managers, right? Who can run social sector intervention first. Second, some of them may not they don't want to get into program management, team leading, They'll say, I want to become a specialist in a particular chosen area. Right? So they would start as in a smaller role, but they'll evolve themselves as in 5 years like a public health specialist or an education expert or a livelihood specialist or somebody who's specialist in water or sanitation and hygiene. I can go on. Or renewable energy. So that's the second area which we have seen in 5-6 years. Some of them becoming a specialist in a particular area. We don't have education experts in the country. We'll talk about that later. The why it took a lot of time for the policy to evolve is also because they were discussing and debating and should we change this, should we change this, not. We have enough, I'm an engineer myself, when I look at it, we have enough engineering colleges, but not enough experts in the domain of education. Right? So that's the second part. Third is the social sector requires a lot of researchers, right? I'm not talking about research that will earn you a PhD degree. Research so that we can make evidence-based decisions, right? To design a program, it should be based on some research that is available. To tell the government that do teach in the mother home language, the mother tongue to this thing. We need research there. To do some interventions in the slums of Bangalore or Dharavi, we need some research to tell them that do this kind of thing. So those are broadly, Ratish, to answer your question. The one is the social sector organizations are getting organized and professionalized. They are reaching out. It's not like olden days ki ha chalo ek resume aa gaya chalo dekhte hain isse kya kar sakte hain. But that has changed. They are now reaching out to the schools and colleges and telling them that we want to recruit you. And you can see even dedicated websites for social sector recruitment, like the NGO box. I know, I mean, you all would know that. That's one part. Second, clearly the need is in three parts. Program managers, number one. Second is technical specialist in a particular area. Third is researchers. अगर ये तीन नहीं पसंद आए तो अपना खुद का social enterprise बना लो यार, right? So that's the fourth area is social enterprises, which is, as Ram clearly said, we have not even scratched the surface when it comes to reaching out to the impact investors. I'll stop here, Ratish.
Great. Can you hear me well?
Yes, very clear, very clear.
Yeah. So yeah, no, thanks so much, Rajgopal, for sharing that. And I just want to build on what you said. I once went to a fellowship program, and these are people that want to work in the social sector and spend 2 years working in a fellowship program. And I asked them, what is the best, most favorite employers for most IT companies? And they said Amazon, Google, Facebook, etc. And I asked them, who is the most favorite employer for the social sector? And they couldn't find a name, and they couldn't kind of name the organization saying, this is my favorite employer. And part of it, as you rightly said, is brand building. But as you also said, that's changing today. There is a lot more, such initiatives that are being created right now. And we keep getting invited to colleges to prepare for case competitions, etc., to build our brand as an employer. So I think it's really, really catching up. So I think what you said is very true. And I just want to build on what you're saying as well, that in addition to the roles that you talked about, which are all very real, I am also seeing today people who are very good at data, people who are very good at consulting, people who are good at financing, and the number of bankers that are coming into the sector to create financial instruments and bonds. I mean, that's also evolving as well, which is creating a set of completely new roles and responsibilities for folks, which I think is very, very useful to watch as well. So thanks so much. I want to now move to Akshay. Akshay, we've, Rajgopal anchored and talked about career opportunities, which is really how do you fit into organizations that are working in this space. You've been an entrepreneur, and a lot of the people who are watching this webinar also have entrepreneurial ambitions to the work they want to do. So would love to hear from you. What is it, is this now a good time to be an entrepreneur in the social sector? And two, what do you think it takes for somebody to pursue that journey? It'd be great to hear from you on that.
Thanks, Ratish. It was really nice listening to everyone before this and gives me perspective. I think to start out, that the way you explained the 3 concentric circles and the different levels of engagement, I think that was a nice way to start, because that kind of was the genesis of my journey as an entrepreneur. So I wouldn't call, this whole social entrepreneurship thing is kind of new, but if I go back to my days as a musician from being a teenager, all the enterprises I've set up have been to create change. Like, why does an entrepreneur create something is because you want to bring about a change in the world that you see. So going back to when I was a teenager, I set up a music company because I was a musician, and I found that there were no record labels promoting independent talent. So I went out and created an entire ecosystem for that, record label, distribution, all of that. Then I joined Red Bull to kind of be part of their marketing team to help set it up. And I saw that being a creative person and being in a very largely left-brained economy, India, I found it to be very frustrating because people didn't understand what I was saying, and all these jhola, beard, stereotypes followed me along. And luckily I've shaved today, but that stereotype has followed me along being a creative person. So I was like, can I create an organization that dispels this whole myth of left and right brain? And is there a way that these two things intersect with each other? So I created a series of talks with creative people and corporate people. So we had Vinita Bali and Malvika Sarukai, who's a Bharatanatyam dancer. But surprisingly, their worlds kind of interweave with each other. Their thought process interweave with each other. So same thing, like Blessed By happened from a personal experience. I saw that we live in a largely material society and people like to buy things. And I believe there's no shortage of resources in the world. It's just that they happen to be concentrated in certain power structures, like Jeff Bezos's $100 billion created through Amazon. What if we could find a way to kind of redistribute some of that wealth using the same principles of capitalism? So I guess I would call myself a romantic capitalist, where I believe that we can use capitalism to create a more equitable distribution of wealth, filtering down to different sections of society. So the entrepreneurial journey finally boils down to wanting to create a change. I believe that it should be something that you believe in very personally. It should be something you feel passionately about. Of course, there are analytical things that, what are the gaps in the industry and things like that need to be looked at. But yeah, the first step is to kind of identify what is it that moves you, because it's that passion that made me sit up in my chair right now and to think about, like, why do I do what I do? And that's something that we should do on a daily basis, no matter what sector we're in, whether we're in the social sector or if I work with Coca-Cola, or as when I worked at Red Bull, I worked with kids in Dharavi and we taught them break dance and music. And as a musician, I worked with hip hop. And today we have like a movie called Gully Boy, which is based on the work that we did. So that's the kind of change you can create no matter what industry you're in. And as an entrepreneur, that's always the seed, is the motivation that kind of spurs you on to wake up every day and walk the talk. Yeah, I don't know if that really answers the question, or was it too abstract? If you want to help me focus it down.
Sure. No, thanks, Akshay. I think definitely helpful. And I think two things that you said. You kind of start to look at what you're really good at as a person, and you look at what moves you. And that at the core of any entrepreneurial journey, because you've got to have both of these, because it's not an easy thing to do. So you probably want to be good at it, number one, and you want to do it every day. Otherwise, there's no intention to wake up and get to this drive every day. Maybe a quick follow-up question to what you said is just in terms of the ecosystem, enabling ecosystem for an entrepreneur, because it is a challenging journey. How do you see that in the social sector today? Any initial thoughts, feedback? And is now a good time to be an entrepreneur? Is there an enabling environment that kind of makes it happen?
So good question. In terms of the ecosystem, perhaps the other esteemed panelists would know more. I'm relatively new to social entrepreneurship. I mean, I've been doing it for 3 to 5 years. I do know that, as Ram mentioned earlier, that and Mr. Rajagopal also mentioned that there is a significant change. There are a lot more professionals joining in the space, and that's kind of what spurred me also to get involved, was this whole stereotype of the beard and the jhola, and how more people who are clean shaven should get involved with this space, both men and women. And so there are impact funds. These are things that I'm learning about on a daily basis. Like, what's the difference between impact funding, grant funding, versus angel funding, VCs. So everything is constantly changing. And I think just the fact that there are so many stakeholders now involved in the space shows that it is a credible opportunity and something that people are willing to get involved with. I remember in 2012, I was invited to the London Olympics for this thing called the Global Impact Institute. And they had Warren Buffett's grandson had kind of created this whole thing. And they first introduced me to these principles of, can we use, traditional market forces, things like transparency, benchmarking in the sector. And that is like, there is so much of that in the space today, like very professionally run organizations like yours, like Ravenet, who are kind of building out this ecosystem. So I think it's a great time to be involved, especially during COVID-19. I think I've been working like at 10x what I've been doing for the last 2 years. I guess never waste a good crisis. And it's a way to pivot and to actually add, if the core of what you do is to add value, then a crisis is the best time to do that, And it gives you that opportunity to say, hey, just tear everything apart. Why am I really doing this? And how can I really impact people? And I think opportunities like, the situation we're in today has created so much change, accelerated change, so many new technological interventions. And yeah, this is probably the best time. I mean, entrepreneurship is where you can actually create a sea change, off change very fast, and it's through collaboration with other people. So now is a great time to be an entrepreneur.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, thanks, Akshay. And, absolutely agree with you. Just the enabling environment, as you said, in terms of impact funds, people are willing to even incubators across the country. The number of incubators in India supporting social impact today, I think 6 years ago was about 5 or 7. Now it's about 45 or 67. I mean, it's a 10x growth in terms of such incubators as well. So I think that's very, very important. I want to have the last question to Akhil. Akhil, you bring in a different milieu and a lens to this conversation. We're all talking about our lives led and, like the old days, how they were, etc. But you are literally the present, and you've made an offbeat choice. I'm wagering a bet that a lot of people who are listening to this conversation are part of traditional educational streams and might have had aspirations for studying impact and social sciences, etc. And given your perspective and the choices you've made, would be great to hear, A, what do you find exciting as you stand at the cusp of your academia and careers? And what are some of the questions or concerns that are in your mind as well as a student?
Sure. Thanks for the session. And it's really enlightening listening to all the insights from all the four panelists. I mean, I in fact have been taking a lot of notes. So yeah, I'll begin off by saying, I too followed, you are more or less formed by your lived experiences and the environment that you're put in. So just to begin with, I mean, as a student, I did CBSE biomath. And then after that, I made a sudden switch to, okay, I need to study something that's within the field of social sciences. And then I opted for economics. And when I studied economics, there's one thing that certain disciplines in most educational systems, what they do is they try to sensitize you to think in a certain manner. And if you want to think out of that discipline, you'd have to do a lot of unlearning as well, because studying, in fact, is also a self-realizational process, right? Like, you realize a lot of stuff. There'll be a lot of stuff that you don't agree with. There'll be a lot of stuff that you agree with. So, I mean, when you focus on something that's really thematic or something that catches your interest, I would say that's where you've got to carry on from that thread. And that's how I found my interest in international relations. And I would definitely say while I was confused as any Generation Z or probably a millennial at this point as well, I also opted for a few internships within this similar field as well. So one of my internship was for a public security organization in the United Arab Emirates, and then I did a corporate internship as well to know how the whole corporate structure is centered and how this would have an effect on the social credit system as well. So I did learn a lot, and I think that's what conditioned my experience into, again, choosing something called international relations. Yes, it's really interesting times, and times have it's been changing, it's evolving. We live in a totally different time, and in fact, people tend to say, our lived experiences, or probably people from our generation or the generation right above us, would be from somewhere around the period of early 2000s, and then hence forward, right? So, I mean, we have been conditioned in a certain manner to think about, okay, a corporate job is something that's really enticing. I should go into that. Or probably for a person with a mindset, I need to do something for a person. But what options do I have? What options do I have if I select social sciences? So I think these are some things that are really enticing and entertaining for me. And probably that's the reason why I chose international relations, again, coming back to that. So right now, my interests are in the field of institutions as an entity. So you take NGOs or intergovernmental organizations, IGOs such as WHO or United Nations, for an instance. And when you tend to think of the synergy between all these organizations with the other entities, governmental entities, individuals, groups within a nation, outside the nation, that's where I'd like to focus my research interests on, or probably work in that field as well. And another thing that I wanted to mention was, you see, I do understand when people talk about NGOs, the first thing that comes to their mind is, oh, what's an NGO? Probably something related to poor people or development. Well, I agree that's the majority push, and that's been happening in India or for other parts of the world, because that's what brings a certain change. But again, that we also have to know that there are certain niches within the system right now, because for instance, you've got intricate structures even within the NGOs, where some NGOs handle with human rights, gender relations, digitalization of a rural community, say for instance, and as Mr. Rajagopal also said, probably public health, renewable energy, and so on and so forth. So I would say, find your interests, or probably the way I would look at it is find your one or two interests. You go knee deep into it, look if that's really interesting for you, and if you could bring about a change in one way or the other as part of as maybe start a social enterprise, or probably as part of a group, and then move on forward to create that one, or that change in one person's life at least. And to ask a few questions, I'd like to, I put it to the panelists, all of you. I would be entering a job market right after my master's in international relations, and with such a volatile time, what can I expect, and what should I expect so that I can stay in my track is my question. Because probably things can change, and I would like to stick on to the path that I've selected. So if anyone could answer that, that'd be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Akhil. Thanks so much. I think we have time for two more questions. So one is really for Ram and Mr. Rajgopal, is as like I'm building on what Akhil said in some sense. You're hiring people regularly, Ram, for your organization, and Rajgopal, you're seeing the students coming in. If you had to name the top 3 skills or capabilities that you're looking for in a person coming into the social sector today, and I know there are various roles, but if you say top 3, what would those qualities be, or what would those skills and capabilities be? I think it'll be great to hear from both of you. Ram, I don't know if you want to go first, and then go to Mr. Rajgopal.
Okay, sure. So it's nice to hear Akhil, the energy level he just exhibited on in terms of what he's done, that the research work he has done on what he wants to do as well. Very, very heartening to hear that. So I think from if I look at it, the things which we look, so this industry is still evolving. So there is, it is not like an engineer with 5 years of experience, or engineer who's done it so and so spirit, I can actually pick up for this particular kind of a job. So, and other than the MSWs kind of a stuff, we don't really have people coming in from all the orientation which is required from social sector. So for me, I think social orientation is very critical when I look at a person. The emotional connect which the person has on the outcome of what is being done, that is something which I start looking at. Because it is not another job. You're coming in with a specific purpose and doing that. So emotional orientation is something we should start. Second is, I think the smelling of the ground related stuff. So the person needs to be hitting the ground and be able to actually go work at the grassroots level. And I'm talking about the freshers who are entering into this at a grassroots level and actually being ready to do that. Third is, it's not the job description, and not many of them are laid down very clearly. So, and there's a whole lot of multitasking which needs to be done for a person who's working in this sector. So someone needs to have the overall orientation about things. And so it's not like any other IT company which I have an HR doing this one, finance doing this one, admin doing something, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of areas which we actually need to do ourselves. So some of these things are the ones which I think are critical for people who are coming fresh into the system. And I think one myth I want to take away from people who are actually want to laterally move from other places, they start to tend to feel that what, बहुत कुछ करना है, मैं आराम से जो social sector में जाके कुछ करता हूँ, kind of an attitude. I think here the amount of time and energy which you spend is much higher, and also because you're closely involved in with humans and that impact, right? So the responsibility aspects actually are much higher. So if someone is looking at coming into this one, they need to be cut out for actually going to a slog. I mean, if they really want to make an impact.
And thank you for bringing that point, the last point up especially. I do think there is a miscommunication. I mean, there is a notion that this is my retirement gig. I'm going to come in and, help other people. I think two things that people learn is A, it's not as simple as a retirement gig. And two is you're helping yourself more than helping other people in doing what you're doing. So I'm glad you brought it up. Mr. Rajgopal, your thoughts, top 3 qualities.
Yeah. I mean, I won't look at it as the top 3. Let me try to explain because you written skills and capabilities, right? It's not about skills alone. The skill that you want in the sector, say programming in R or picking up some language, you can learn that, right? But and that is important. That don't get me wrong. You need those skills of management skills or technology skills, whatever, or research method skills. That's required. What is really required to work in the social sector, I'm picking at what Ram said, is perspectives, right? I made that mistake, right? I made that mistake of working on an education space without really knowing the community. So if I give an example, you may have a wonderful technology method to teach something, and then you'll see that that's not working in that community. So what are most of the academic institutions trying to do, let it be TISS or Ambedkar University, Delhi or Azim Premji, wherever you go, is try to build that perspective building, which happens only if you go through a social science kind of a training. Unfortunately, I'm glad I envy when I see Akhil that he quickly, science is good. Don't get me wrong. We need science and technology. I've been telling engineers to get into social sectors, but with the right perspectives. So how do I'll give an example of perspective, right? So if you're working in the education sector, you should know answers like, what is the purpose of education? Number one. Are we sending kids to school only to find a job? Only for an economic thing? We should know that, number one. I'm not going to answer that. That's a 1-2 year program. Second, you should know how is the social background of the child impacting his or her learning in the classroom. Why are each student learning differently? Somebody's doing well in school, somebody's not doing. Is there a linkage between the social background of the child, right? Third, in education to work, you should know child psychology. If somebody had learned child psychology well, we would have abolished this board examination business in the country. We would not have this final high-stake examination. So I'll stop here. So when I can talk on that perspective building, that's why it took 2 years for me to build those perspectives to start contributing in any of the discussions. Otherwise, using your process management or program management skills, if you approach a social problem, you are in for a disaster, right? So that's what I feel. Not in top 3. It's a combination of perspectives, which is knowing the society well, wherever you're going to intervene. Second is the skill. That combination is what will make you a fantastic professional social sector. But if you pinpoint and ask me what is the skill required, this is what I tell all the youngsters. It's very difficult for adults. The ability to distinguish between opinion and fact.
That is so
You're
true.
just bombarded with information on your mobile phone. I used to joke that I can stand for an election and win in a particular village using social media campaign and big flex posters. And if you Google my name, you'll find a lot of videos and something nice written about me, and I may win the election. But how do you really know? So that they call it critical thinking skill, but I'm going to simplify. So the message to all of them I find it harder. So because you have your own biases. So how do you really question your own belief system or suspend your bias for a while and then look at the problem? That's the skill, a top skill that you will need to work in the social sector space. And we do that academically.
Yeah, and I think it's even more important in the social sector also because people always have a solution to all social problems. Like you say, all my relatives know how to end poverty, So, and just in interest of time, I know we are about, so I know we are out of time from our side. I had a question, but I'm going to hold that. I'm just requesting the team to also start sharing maybe questions from the audience that may have come in. And as that comes in, maybe I'll just, ask the last question that I had in mind. And maybe I think, and again, building on what Rajgopal said in my mind, I think it's like, I don't know how many of our education systems actually teach critical thinking. Right? Like we're conditioned otherwise, to be honest. It's not even that we're not building for critical thinking, we're conditioned to the other end. So as we see the needs for such people, and I mean, and for me, the talent needed in the social sector is talent needed across. We need socially responsible people in every industry. What are some of the things, or what is the one thing that you would like to have changed in the education system today, both the schooling and the college education system today, so that we have more social leaders, more people in the social sciences space? I think, and I just probably want to start from Akhil, given you're closest to the reality at the moment, and then move on to the rest of the panelists. If you had to pick one thing, saying, I wish I had more of this in the current education system, what would that be?
Could you just repeat the question again? I mean, it was
Sure,
such
okay.
a big. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, no problem. So as we discussed about talents and opportunities, the capabilities in the social sector, etc. I'm saying as the need for these such people is going to keep growing. Knowing that, what is the one thing we will change in the current education system or the education that's available to young people, right? That one thing that will help create or accelerate the supply of people who potentially can be social leaders, social entrepreneurs, etc.
Exactly. And that's really an interesting question, to be really honest. I would say, you know, how our system, our education system, or at least from what I know, this is my personal experience, is structured in a rote learning manner where you just repeat the thing you study and then you try to register that in your mind, and then with the assumption that you could apply it somewhere in your life. So when you study algebra or geometry, the assumption is that, okay, probably somewhere in life, when you're at a grocery store, you're going to apply that somewhere at some instance. But no, that's not how it should work. You know, practical skills are what should be taught in the schools and universities, colleges, whatnot. Creativity should actually be, you know, they should actually have a pathway to creativity, and also have that innovative mindset, allow students to question, because when you think, I'll just give you an instance. When you think about poverty, you're going to think about poverty in one way, in just one or a few ways. You're going to say a person who's below the absolute poverty line is someone who would be in poverty. But no, that's not how it is, because if you're going to go around the world and look at how they suffer from poverty, it's subjective. It's going to change from one place to other. So that learned experiences could actually mean, you know, question things and learn a lot about those small things that are present within the broader structure of the system. And yeah, and be responsible for your actions, because there's a lack of responsibility on all around the system, I would say, among students, amongst teachers, the whole system, to be really honest. So responsibility also matters, as Mr. Rajagopal said. You know, if you're responsible for your action, the more benefit that you would get and you would give to others as well. Yeah, that's it from me.
Great, thanks so much, Akhil. And I think the questions have started to trickle in, so I'll probably take some of that and then come back to the rest of the panelists. So one is the first question, and it'd be great for anyone in the panel to sort of take it. Why are there so many gaps in this sector's education industry transition? You know, so I'm guessing in a computer science field, what you study in your BE sets you fairly well for an entry-level job in an IT company. But let's say for the social sector, can the same be held true? Are there major gaps? And two is, why do those gaps exist? I don't know if there are any thoughts, feedbacks on that.
So if I can go, so I think the gaps are pretty much similar, irrespective of whichever industry they're in. I think an IT engineer is as much gap in actually going and doing his or her job as much as a person who's trying to get into a social sector. I think from going back to your previous discussion also, I think there's a community orientation. If that starts coming in at I've looked at the Western world and what are the things which they've been doing well. If we start bringing in the community orientation, the schooling and graduation level, and also bring in the development goals, teach them what the development goals are. It is as basic as doing a math or having a basic understanding of a social and other subjects. If we are able to bring those aspects in it, I think that will go a long way. But as we know, I think from an education system point of view, it will actually give you a little background. does not really, equip you with all the skills to be able to go hit and run for the going. But if there is an orientation which is lacking, which probably can be brought in, that makes them a little more rounded personality to get into the social sector.
Got it. No, thank you, Ram. I want to concur with what you're saying. I think even creating a model where people feel like they can solve social problems in their own context, which builds that community orientation right from the childhood, right? A fifth standard kid can solve a social problem in his or her context, and so can a 10-year-old, a 15-year-old, etc. Which just automatically builds a lot of the other skills and builds the right community orientation as well. So I think that's a very good point. The second question that's come in is around, are there, I think this is a specific question on social entrepreneurship, which is, are there government initiatives and funds available for social entrepreneurs in our country? And what are such funds or support that is offered to social entrepreneurs? I don't know if any of you want to take it. I have a couple of thoughts, but it'd be great to have you as panelists to add your thoughts first.
So I think let me take our example of how some of our so we did have NSDC has been established, and at that point of time NSDC was it's a government semi-government body. It had some of the funds to be able to available for the entrepreneurs to get start off in the social sector. We do have non-governmental related ones as impact investors who are out there, but I think we need to prove a point before you go and actually grab that. So to be able to start from ground zero, someone needs to take that first punch, and then once you start establishing and actually making it talk by itself, that's when you'll have a lot of people who can actually come across and help in the process. So, and I think Ratish, you must be having a lot of those insights into how this works, because you guys consult a lot on this space.
Yeah. No, I want to build on what you said and share what you made is the first important point. If the first question that you're asking as an entrepreneur is who's going to give me money to start it, I don't think that's going to work very well. I think to be able to start from what is the idea that I have and what is the problem I'm going to solve and demonstrate that. Interestingly speaking, once you do that, there is actually a ton of money that's coming into the sector to promote, like I said, the number of new incubators that are coming in to provide you seed funding, provide you spaces to work are many, like all management institutions, including IIM Bangalore, have incubators, private incubators like Unlimited, Nudge, and all that have come in. So there is an entire ecosystem of seed funding and, and other hand-holding support that is available. But they all ask you the same question, saying, what is that idea that you're burning with, and what have you already done to demonstrate that you're passionate about it? I think that's number one. Second is, I think governments, especially the Niti Aayog, has invested a lot in establishing entrepreneurship through Atal Innovation Centers and a lot of the other models that are coming in right now, which actually become safe spaces for you to try out ideas and take some of the funding. And like I said earlier, when Akshay and I were discussing as well, there's never been a better time to be an entrepreneur, because there is a recognition that new ideas are going to come in. And I think once your idea comes in, not just government, there is a lot of philanthropic funding and other seed funding that is available for entrepreneurs, both for-profit and for non-profit models that you can leverage, and that might be very relevant for you to take up as well. The third question that, that has come in is, this is an interesting question. So how do we make volunteering, social work, and mentoring more mainstream? Like, how can we encourage volunteering to be more relevant, social work and mentoring to be more relevant? And I think the broader question really is, there is a lot of energy in the young people today, and there is a lot of energy needed in solving social problems. What are effective ways of unleashing this energy to solve these problems? So if there's a way we can take the immense power of the youth to solve some of these problems, any suggestions? Some of it might not be a full-time job, but are there other ways we can make that happen? Any examples, suggestions from the panel, I think would be very valuable to hear as well.
So I can contribute my 2 bits to this. So this is kind of what we're trying to do, is back to your illustration of the 3 concentric circles, is how to build a bridge through these 3 concentric circles and to take people from the periphery inward and vice versa as well. So one way that we're doing it is through consumerism. Like people like to buy products. How can we take people from buying products to actually volunteering, mentoring, exactly what we talked about? How we have decided to do that is by telling powerful stories on, so you start off by, so we've created a 6-step user journey where you buy a product, but finally the product is actually a physical manifestation of a human being. So you talk about the human being. So now I take you from the physical product to caring about a human being. I then tell you more about this human being. I build a relationship between you and the maker. And then this creates an emotional response in you. And then I say, would you like to participate in this person's life? And that's how we do it. So, like now that Ram in Kerala made this this sari, and you want to participate in his life. He has an issue, or the NGO he works with needs some sort of support in terms of accounts or marketing. Would you like to participate? Would you like to contribute? And it's like a seamless journey that we're trying to create. And of course, the question, whoever asks this question is inclined towards the sector. So how do we work with people like you and help you do more? And then the second person is that who vaguely feels like they want to participate or want to feel good. How do we work with them? And so these are the two kinds of people that we want to communicate to. One is like the power user, which is you. And the other one is, like someone who's just floating on the outskirts, and how do we get them involved in the easiest way possible? Yeah, so I think that was my 2 bits.
I think we have an example in ABNet itself. So what we've been working with specific universities, and if there is a buy-in from right at the top in terms of this activity is going to be, it's become a project for them, and the grading and everything has been done based on what you do there as well. So that brings about a level of seriousness of what people are coming in for from a volunteership point of view, and actually doing a project which is a live project, which they actually develop with the people who are on the ground who are doing a specific area of work, and that's worked well. I think the response which we have, and then the way we have seen the output coming in from the seriousness of these people contributing has been good. So that's something which can be adopted.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Great. I know we have 3 minutes on the clock, so I just want to maybe briefly add my 2 cents to this question, then maybe close it for us. I think one for me, one of the organizations that we worked with, which is a corporate foundation, built this framework called the Walk, Run, Fly framework for volunteering, which I found very interesting. Walk is you want to keep it loose. You want to spend a few hours. Etc. And then, there are a ton of NGOs, ton of online volunteering opportunities that are emerging right now. There's actually a government website for online volunteering, which not many people know of, where you can go and say, listen, I want to do this, etc. There is a run framework where you want to commit a little more time. I would say take Akhil's, experience interning with NGOs. Like we get a lot of school kids coming to Sattva as interns. It's I keep worrying whether it's child labor or not, because they come in of their own violation. But very interesting, very smart kids wanting to work for 2 months, 3 months, summer vacations, do something, a project on the side, or take go to an organization like Cry and take up a project with them, etc. I think that's a run. And then the fly is really where you want to commit a longer time. Like I think one of the best things to have happened in India is really for me the social sector fellowships. Teach for India, Gandhi Fellowship, Ambedkar Fellowship, Buddha Fellowship. There are a ton of them that have come in, where you commit 2 years to really do serious work, where you're evaluated on your ability to create impact on the ground. And that is unleashing, for me, the pipeline of entrepreneurs that we are seeing in this country, because they spend 2 years solving the problem, which I think, going back to what Ram and Rajgopal said, builds perspective, because you're not theoretically solving a teacher's problem. You're dealing with the problem every day and you're graded on it, and I think that's a very useful thing. So I think looking at that Walk, Run, Fly framework in some sense for volunteering or mentoring, I think would be something that's interesting for everyone as well. So in the interest of time, the last 1 minute, firstly, thanks everybody. I think fantastic panel. I think you stayed to the promise of what you offer, what we thought we would deliver on. So great. And I think a couple of quick highlights I want to kind of summarize. One is what we started in the beginning about the evolution of the sector. From 20 years ago to now, the sector is a different place. The capital that's coming in, the jobs that are getting created are very, very different. And I think that's an important place to be. Two, I think the capabilities that are required and the jobs available are becoming different. Partly, as Mr. Rajagopal rightly said, is companies are seeking out talent, defining their needs of talent, and then going to colleges and creating jobs and career paths for people. So the readiness there is actually very, very important. Thirdly, we spoke about entrepreneurship. For two things. One, the ground rules of entrepreneurship don't change. You really have to care deeply about what you're talking about, and you have to be good at it. But the good thing today is that the enabling environment in terms of funding, seeding, incubation, and all of that is kind of growing. The fourth thing that Akhil talked about is in terms of even the way to, I think he made 2 points, which I thought was very interesting. One is internships as a way of experiencing what is possible, but also getting to the corporate side for a while to understand how that works and how that complements this side. I think it's very, very important. And pick a few bets. You might never be sure as a young person what you're going to do for the rest of your life. To be honest, none of us in the panel do. We all had very different ideas on how 2020 is going to be for all of us. So no one knows what's going to be in the future, but take a few bets that you're passionate about and go after it. I think that makes a lot of sense. And lastly, like we said, there is the first prerequisite, probably the only prerequisite, because the rest of this can be learned, is really a commitment to wanting to make a change. And that willingness to roll up your sleeves and go on the ground and build perspective. I think without that, you're not going to enjoy the sector, and you're not going to be effective in the sector either. And I think as long as you're willing to commit that space and time, I think you're going to have a fantastic career in the sector. I hope I did a fair summary of all the points that we discussed. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. Good luck, all the people who are on the other side. And I hope you found this useful as well.